data that has never been gathered before. It's a conclusion that no one's ever really been able to make because we haven't had a good controlled study.
There are plenty of reasons why a simulator can actually give you a better evaluation than the actual experience.
VR is a fantastic technology, but the engineering behind it really matters. The physics engine, getting the physics absolutely right is important for obviously high fidelity, high stakes certification, and obviously very complex machine.
Welcome to the ITI LITES podcast, for leaders in industrial technology, education, and safety, where we talk to thought leaders in heavy and construction industries in this exciting time of rapid innovation. In this episode, ITI CEO Zack Parnell, CEO of the NCCCO Foundation Brent, and PhD and CEO of Authentic Testing Wallace Judd discuss the NCCCO Foundation's recent study on how virtual reality can play a role in certification.
Graham, I'd love to start with you if you could explain, first of all, your background. I mean, you just won a Lifetime Achievement Award with the National Commission for the Certification of Crane Operators, and you were, I think, the founding CEO. And I remember in Baltimore, I think I went to the 20-year anniversary. This year is the 25th. Is that right? So
that's correct.
Yeah. Could you kind of take us? It's hard for a humble guy to take us through a background, but please do.
Well, you're absolutely right. It's coming up on 25 years, and that's really hard to assimilate. 25 years ago, or maybe even 50 years ago, when people used to talk about 25 years prior, I used to think, well, it can't be that hard to get your arms around. And then, of course, when you actually get to that point, you realize it really is, because some things along that 25-year journey appear to have happened yesterday, and other times they appear to be prehistoric. So it's been a very interesting journey, and it was a hard decision to make, actually, to know when to step down from that position. But it's very clear that was, to me, that it was the right time, because we, as an organization, had, over that period of time, once we found our legs as a certification body, we found ourselves diverging into other areas related to testing, but not necessarily mainstream certification, not the sort of activities that you would necessarily expect a certification body would be engaged in. And so, and there were some other things too that the board a number of years ago felt like they'd like to explore, but again, they really weren't necessarily mainstream certification activity. It wasn't the fundamental mission of NCCCO as established in 1995. And so it was at that time, probably about 5 years ago, that the first conversations around establishing a foundation occurred. And they evolved over a number of meetings of the board. And so the sort of sketch, the outline, if you will, the exoskeleton of a foundation was created. But for all kinds of other reasons, primarily related to the continued expansion activity of NCCCO to something like, I think what it is now, about 26 or 30 certifications, and a waiting list, if you will, of certification programs in line, it became clear that if these activities were going to happen, they were going to happen through a foundation, and there was going to have to be a very intentional decision to move forward, which coincided with some thoughts I had about stepping down, and so from NCCCO. And so those two kind of activities all came together. And so about 18 months or so ago, the foundation was established, and coming up on about 10 months ago, it started to become active. And so the foundation is a 501c3 charitable organization. It was set up by NCCCO, but it has a separate mission, it's a separate entity, has a separate organization, and a separate goals in mind. And those are quite diverse, actually, although they all sort of integrate around those activities that sort of holistically had grown out of the certification process. So workforce development is a prime activity and a goal of NCCCO. There's a lot of organizations active in that space, and it's not an area that we felt like we had to reinvent. So we're active participants in the Lift and Move USA initiative. The ACE Mentor Program of America, which some folks might be familiar with, we're also participating in, and initiatives like Youth Build, which is sort of a second chance, secondary school for high schoolers. And the connecting piece between all three of those is that the best kept secret, in the employment world, is the fact that construction can provide this extraordinary career. I think we're making progress. I think all the various initiatives around the country are making progress, but getting to the high schoolers and getting to their counselors is the key piece of this. And it's such an easy sell, if a sell is even needed, when you explain that rather than buying a whole bunch of debt for somebody that may really not be best suited for college, they can actually be gainfully employed right out the box in a career that will take them wherever they want to go. So that's very exciting. And some other areas we're involved in, like military transition, re-entering offenders, and grants and scholarships are all coming down the line. But probably for the purposes of this conversation, the Safety Information Research and Education Network, known as SIREN, which is a product of the foundation, is engaged in education and research, not training. Neither NCCCO nor the foundation will ever get directly involved in the training of individuals to perform construction type work, whether it's operating or planning or engineering, but education in the broader sense about the industry, about the safety aspects of the industry and so forth. And so right out the box, we did have a study that was being initially undertaken by NCCCO that then transferred over to the foundation for final review and publication. And so that brings us right to, I think, the subject of this podcast, which is the virtual reality study, which had started back, as I said, under the auspices of NCCCO, and which has now entered into the foundation purview.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, it's been neat to be a little part of this transition and genesis of the NCCCO Foundation with this study, a study that you roped in Wallace Judd pretty quickly to. I'd love to hear your guys' history a little bit, Graham, and how you knew Wallace before, and then how you decided on bringing Wallace into the fold here. Well,
without wanting to embarrass Wallace, and certainly without wanting him to show any embarrassment on video, I would tell you that was the easiest part of this whole process. Because when it comes to practical exam testing, practical exam design, and practical exam implementation, there is really nobody else proficient in the way that Wallace is. Dr. Judd came to my attention pretty early on in the development of the CCO practical exam. I think, Wallace, you and I first met when you were an ANSI assessor for the accreditation program, and there was a mutual respect established immediately, because I think you were impressed with the way that the NCCCO and its subject matter experts had created, really out of thin air, a practical exam, a performance-based test where there had been none before of that type, for what is a very challenging situation where you have very large and very expensive pieces of equipment, and you're trying to create some aspect, some mirroring, if you will, of real-world activity in a controlled test environment. And nobody's really ever successfully addressed that before. And so Dr. Judd was very impressed. And in fact, I think you stepped down as an assessor at that point from ANSI in order to work with us.
Yeah,
with NCCCO.
I took a year off because I wanted to work with you instead of just be your assessor.
Well, and we were very fortunate that you chose that route, because the program benefited from it. NCCCO benefited from it, and that means that the industry and the individuals, all the way down to the individual candidates, benefited from it because they had a more robust test as a result. So you can see that Wallace's reputation precedes him, and I had the privilege of presenting with Wallace a number of august events over the years. And so when it came to designing this study, there was clearly nobody else on the list apart from Wallace. So that was the introduction, and I was delighted when Wallace accepted the challenge. You know, our first exposure to virtual reality, though, Zack, goes back a few months before the study even began. And I think it was actually at a commissioners meeting that ITI hosted up at your facility in Washington State. Yeah,
that's right. I recall that we had 50 or 60 commissioners underneath an overhead crane system. It was kind of this merger of you know, committee work under industrial setting. It was kind of cool, and we had the simulator off to the side.
It was very cool. In fact, you know, I probably, like many folks on this webinar, we go to lots of meetings and so forth, and they're generally held in fairly sterile hotel rooms. And this was actually in a shop, and you could not, A, avoid the fact of the industry you were working in, and B, it just felt so much more appropriate and more energizing, and to have a meeting there. But one of the stars of the show was the fact you had your virtual reality set up there for folks to try. And I don't know how many of our listeners have experienced virtual reality, probably, you know, a pretty good number by now, but I'm sure everybody remembers the first time they put those goggles on and had that experience, that immersive experience of suddenly having your entire reality changed, and you go into this strange new world of virtual reality. And you know, simulators have been around a long time, obviously, and they've gotten better and better, flat screen simulators, and some of them are really good indeed. And some of the offshore simulators I know that I've experienced have been outstanding in their representation, the ability to change parameters and climate and so forth. But the thing about virtual reality is it puts you in the experience completely. And so, I mean, I was very impressed, knocked out, in fact, and that led really to our first opportunity to expose our world, Zack, to that at the ConExpo that came up shortly after. Yeah, that was really neat to have. In 2017, I think we had a simulator at the CCO Lift Safety Zone, and then I've got that we're hosting a webinar here in case you want to see some photos. We'll be hosting a webinar and showing some photos on that. You can check it out on ITI.com. But it was neat to have a unit there. And I think at that ConExpo VR, that was obviously the first. Oculus had just kind of launched the Oculus Rift a year before. So that was the first ConExpo that kind of had widespread VR available. So yeah, and it was from there. I think you had the gentleman from ANSI, you know, experience the simulator and get pretty excited. And that was the genesis of the study, right? Right. So two things really happened that really provided the stimulus for the study. First of all, thanks again, Zack, for making that available. We did indeed have it at the ConExpo 2017 on the Lift Safety Zone in the Gold Lot, and it was the star of the show. It was the star of our show, no question. I mean, we had people in line almost constantly wanting to try this new technology, and we had people coming back that had tried it before. And so positive was the response, in fact, that we convened an ad hoc group at that meeting, at that event, to gauge not just the sort of street reaction, but also to gauge the reaction from subject matter experts who had hundreds and possibly thousands of hours collectively of seat time, because that was really where the rubber hit the road for us. It was one thing to be, you know, in awe of technology, but is did this really have any potential use in the real world of rough and tumble border construction? And it was when we would sit 30 and 40 year veterans in the seat and have them experience it and have their response. We actually ran a survey during the course of that event, and have it come back so positive that and again, collecting the same information through the ad hoc group, that we decided that this was worth exploring. And then the second thing was, as you said, Zach, we had the benefit of the then Senior Director of ANSI Personnel Credentialing, Dr. Roy Swift, come by the booth, and he was equally blown away. And the first words that he said to me when he took the Oculus Rift off was, "You should do a study." And so that was pretty much it. I mean, we left ConExpo with a definite plan. We were all making plans on the way home. So, and so that really led to, fast forward, here we are having this conversation.
Yeah. And I got to give you a lot of credit. You, with your leadership, NCCCO is always very good at keeping your cards very close to your vest, buddy. So we had no idea how well it went. I know we spoke. I think we found out, a few months later that, Graham, you were kind of like, yeah, it went pretty well, and we'd like to do a study. I was like, okay, great. And so it's great to hear how well it went. And I'm getting a little bit of a hard time, but it was it was a blast. It was great timing. I got to say too, and Wallace, I'd love to your opinion on this as well, but it's funny, VR experiences, I liken them to, you can watch a movie produced by Marvel Studios, and I mean, Marvel has almost completely upended storytelling and graphics and all these things in movie science, in a sense, movie making science. Or you can go watch an indie film that was made for $1 million, and that there is that differentiation. VR is a fantastic technology, but the engineering behind it really matters. The physics engine, getting the physics absolutely right is important for obviously high fidelity, high stakes certification, and obviously very complex machines like cranes. But then also the graphics really matter, because if you can't, those are the two things that those elements, if you don't get those right, the VR certainly immerses you, but you could be immersed in that indie film, otherwise. So I got to say that our team, Cirrus Labs up in Edmonton, Alberta, they're top notch. University of Alberta actually has a game design, world-leading game design school. And that's where a lot of these people came out of. And Cirrus Labs has just built an incredible physics engine and graphics team to produce incredible high stakes equipment simulators. And Wallace, you've had the pleasure of working with those guys.
Not only is the physics engine really important, but it's surprising how little details really work into the thing. Like, for example, the sky. Whether the clouds are moving or whether the clouds are stationary matters in this circuit. Not only that, but the sound of the engine. I remember being up in Edmonton, and one of the experts said, well, this engine doesn't sound right. Because he's listening to the engine as demands are made on it, lifting the material. So it turns out that you not only have to get the physics right, which is absolutely at the core of it, but there are a lot of little details you'd never think about that contribute to the reality.
You're absolutely right. I remember when we first had you engaged, we had gone through a preliminary research project, really, and there were some learnings from that. And then you did go up to Alberta and met with the engineers, and there were several of these little nuances that seemed to make a lot of difference, obviously, in the next study. And it was neat to hear, and that was the only. I wish I could have. I got to travel with you a little bit, but I didn't get to do that trip with you in Edmonton. But I missed out because it sounds like there was a lot of interesting lessons learned both ways. And Wallace, you come from an engineering background, so I'd love, in software engineering specifically. So I'd love to, if you could share a little bit about. I think it's fascinating that you were at Xerox PARC and Apple Apple engineer in your previous life. It's almost, you must get embarrassed to hear you have a Princeton degree, Harvard degree, and a Stanford PhD. You are a very, very, very well educated and humble guy, and just a world-leading expert. So I've been so blessed to know you and have you involved in this through Graham's introduction. So it's been fantastic getting to know you. But help us understand how you went from software, which is a cool background because now you're into VR testing, and getting into ANSI auditor and performance testing now.
Well, basically, I had to get into software in order to do my dissertation because it was a very technical thing on ways of evaluating tests. And so I didn't have any choice. But then when I was at Apple, I saw the potential for using this new medium, the personal computer, to do training. And fortunately, Apple went public and I took my share stock benefits and went up to Grass Valley, California and started a training company. And then it was online training and it went quite well until I realized, hey, if I did ask people to do these activities without any instruction, it'd be a test. And that's when I got into this software testing industry. Fast forward a number of years and I have worked on robotic surgery, for example, a wonderful simulation opportunity. But what they did and what people have been doing with virtual reality is training people and then turning it over to humans to evaluate them. And I was very much attracted to this survey, this study, because of the fact that it was the first chance that I've seen in the industry for people to take the virtual reality, test with it, and see how well it predicted actual behavior. That was the draw, and that's the core of the whole thing. And thank you, Graham, for giving me the opportunity, because I'll tell you what, it's satisfied a lot of my curiosity. My curiosity isn't over because we have more stages to go. But this was an exciting opportunity from my perspective, and from the perspective of the testing industry. Yeah. So.
Yeah, this sort of it's sort of a breakthrough on three fronts. We feel that the crane and equipment, world, performance testing, and virtual reality. All three of those industries, if you will. The study certainly provides some interesting paths forward for all three. We keep talking about the study as if everyone's read it, and it's humorous because I don't think our listeners would have read it yet. So can you, Wallace, walk us through the what is the CCO practical exam sort of look like? That might be a Graham and Wallace question, but then Wallace, how did you design the study, and can I give us a framework to work within?
Well, I actually took a preliminary design that was done by staff at CCO and just refined it. That was basically all it was. But I wanted to make sure that, for example, people were taking the exam in virtual reality and on the crane, on the actual crane. But if you did it in that sequence all the time, they would have a practice effect by having taken the virtual reality first and then taking the crane. So we had to swap that and make sure it was even. We also wanted to make sure that we had the option to know what the scoring was like at the micro level. Instead of just getting test scores, we wanted to make sure that we got their score both in virtual reality and with the actual crane at the micro level. What did they do on this particular task? What did they do on that task? And it was the availability of the data from CCO that allowed us to refine the analysis in the long run. And our curiosity at all points was, well, how good a predictor can we make this? And so that was essentially what we did. Yeah.
Yeah, and Graham, you obviously were there at the beginning of the crane operator test, the test design, can you walk us through just the tasks involved in the actual certification exam?
Sure. Well, I think those are pretty well established, and they've been really with us from inception. There's several tasks that work from essentially a walk-around inspection of the crane, and all the way up to a zigzag corridor, where the operator candidate has to maneuver a load of known weight through a corridor, and with both horizontal and vertical parameters. And there are ways of measuring that as we've done. So one of the things I know that we've always tried to do is to, I guess we've ultimately done it with virtual reality potentially, is to remove subjectivity from the process. So it's for folks that maybe even those that are familiar with the exam will maybe wonder why we have so many pieces of equipment on some of the tasks, particularly the zigzag corridor task, which has poles and bases and lines and tennis balls and so forth. And it's really all about making sure that the examiner is observing and not judging. So there really isn't anything. It's always a go, no-go decision on the part of the examiner as to whether or not something occurs, rather than whether or not, in the examiner's personal opinion, this individual is qualified. So that's really always been the foundation of the exams. And I suspect, ironically, probably gave the folks at Cirrus Labs and ITI the biggest challenge. It was not just making sure the clouds moved and the engine sounded right, but also whether those balls were bouncing off the poles correctly and so forth.
Yeah, the tennis ball physics were spot on, trust me. Yeah, Joel Oliva, your number two, I believe, in command at NCCCO at the time, had basically, he was the first one to say and realize, we're basically taking a test design from '95 and virtualizing tennis balls, and that was the method he had to use in the real world to calculate or understand how many deductions to give somebody. And a computer obviously can do that in much different ways. Let's actually, and reflecting even on the complexity of performance testing currently in the crane world, currently candidates across the U.S. test on, dozens and hundreds of different makes and models and years of cranes, so there's a huge heterogeneity of options. We even found that in the first research project. We had testing going on at West Coast Training, they had about 3 or 4 cranes in the same sort of class, a Grove rough terrain 30-ton crane, but the machine might have been built in 1990. I think it was converted to hydraulic, and the simulator, of course, is a virtualized crane. And we were using a Tadano GR1000XL, which frankly has a little bit different slew speeds and hoist speeds and all that. So what did you guys think about? I think we realized pretty early on in that first research project, we really we gotta figure out if we can find the most comparable real crane to the virtual crane, which we eventually did in Houston. But that's just the reality, actually, currently of the test. If I was going to go take a test today in Washington State, and if I failed it, I could take a test on a completely different crane a month from now in California, and that could affect my ability to pass or fail the exam. So, what did you guys think about that whole? What did you guys learn, I guess, from that process? How we're trying to reconcile this real world machine of all sorts to a virtualized crane?
Well, there was a one-to-one match. The controls matched all sorts of stuff. By the way, Zach, I don't know if you can give me the screen, but I've got a picture of the maze and the test, and I can explain in more detail what Graham was talking about when he was talking about the various tasks that were required.
Yeah, there's the first task is like a pre-use inspection.
Right.
and then there's the ability to put the headache ball into barrels at 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock, and then taking a test weight through this corridor, which is sort of a
it's a maze.
Yeah.
Can we? Is it too late? Can we change that from maze to zigzag corridor? Because that technically is called the zigzag corridor.
Yeah, you bet. Yeah, so taking, the user or the operator has to take the barrel through the zigzag corridor backwards and forwards, and that corridor includes 90-degree turn, 2 90-degree turns, and it essentially forces the operator to use 3 functions at one time, and keeping the barrel off the ground and all of the things while not knocking over the tennis balls. So as you can see, these are the virtual tennis balls we were talking about, and challenging, but it was interesting to reproduce. And it's funny, I don't know if you guys heard this at ConExpo, a crane rental company owner actually told me he recalls his score. I think he knew his time for the zigzag corridor when he took his test years ago. And he actually repeated the same exact time on the zigzag forward, is what he told us, on a similar make and model machine. And then what was really wild was he was able to knock over one of the poles and then pick it back up by moving the barrel to the bottom of the plank, and tipping the pole back up like this. And he said he's actually done that in real life as well, and that's why he thought about trying it. So incredibly realistic. But I'd like to go back, Wallace, to the idea of just all the different types of cranes. And I don't know if my question is really around, is there, the way I look at it, I see that there's a general issue in that there's, again, people can take a person can receive a certification card testing on a much different machine than somebody else. And I guess that happens obviously in the automotive world. We all take our test drive on different cars. But I'm just curious I'm really a novice when it comes to performance testing. Is that a feature or a bug in the performance tests for crane operators?
Graham, you're probably better able to answer that than I.
Well, I'd be happy to comment on it. On the one hand, it's inevitable, right? There are just so many, some of these cranes have a 30-year life. So over a 30-year life or longer, from dozens of manufacturers who haven't necessarily been consistent in the way they've built equipment, or the control systems that clearly have evolved too over time, it would be practically impossible to create a certification program for every model manufacturer of crane out there. And even if you did, there's no guarantee that the exact same machine, the exact same model of a machine with a different serial number will perform exactly the same way as the same model with a different serial number. So that's just a reality. And, Wallace may be able to speak to how you sort of generalize across, different platforms like that. But the task that the subject matter experts were faced with when they first created this program back in 1999, 2000 was, how do we pull the essence of what's required of a crane operator, regardless of what machine he's operating, what type of machine is operating within the 4 types of mobile cranes, which is why you have types of mobile cranes, tower cranes and overhead cranes, and 20 so different categories, because to some extent you can clearly say a tower crane is different to operate than a mobile crane, but there is a point at which you simply have to say this is a generic test of essential, i.e. basic skills. The neat thing though, and this is an important piece to remember, and it's very timely to bring it up, is that certification is the middle piece of the qualification continuum that OSHA has established now, once and for all. After 2 decades of deliberations, we have a 3-part piece of component process of qualification, starting with training, moving into certification, and then finishing up with evaluation. So and that's really, certification has always been promoted by I would venture, Wallace, to guess that in the certification community as a whole, but certainly within the crane operator testing community, it's a tool in the toolbox. It has limitations. It absolutely clearly does, and we've always said so since day one. It doesn't mean to say that it's not useful. Put in the context of prior training and post-certification evaluation by the employer on the specific machine, in the specific configuration, in the specific working environment that crane will operate, that's the gold standard sequence. You've got everything then in its place. The training has its integrity, the certification has its integrity, and then you have the final evaluation, which is to make sure the final piece of the puzzle that comes in that says that this operator, in the opinion of the employer, is qualified to operate that particular machine.
Basically, in the simulation, you can do things that you would be afraid to do on the actual site. In other words, you can put people in a scissor lift and have them go up 75 feet in a virtual machine, but you would never want them to do that on an actual site. So there are plenty of reasons why a simulator can actually give you a better evaluation than the actual experience. That's clearly the case with airplane simulators, where you don't want to take a 747 and put it in an awkward position that you have to do the right stuff in order not to crash it. If you want to practice stalls, you want to practice them in a virtual system, not in a real, multi-million-dollar plane.
Take us through, Wallace, I guess, the general results. What did you learn from the study?
The primary conclusion was that with this simulator, you could make a decision about whether or not somebody was a competent crane operator.
The classification accuracy on the actual crane was 87%. The decision consistency in the virtual simulator was 94%. So we were actually able to predict with greater accuracy what people would do on the crane with the virtual system than with an actual crane. And that may have been odd because of the fact that it was a small study with 52 candidates. And as we get more information over a broader range of cranes, that result may or may not hold up. But what I can say is that we can predict with very high accuracy whether somebody will be able to pass a test on an actual crane with high reliability.
Yeah,
That's
the key thing.
So I think that's an important data that has never been gathered before. It's a conclusion that no one's ever really been able to make because we haven't had a controlled study like that was created. I do just want to add, Wallace, because I know some of our listeners are going to be attuned to words of training, evaluation, and certification. You used the word qualified, and I think you said qualified to operate a crane. We would say certified to operate the crane, because the qualification doesn't come until all three of those in OSHA's world. And
Sure.
we, right, for benefit or not, we live in OSHA's world. I think most people would agree that it is a benefit. But their definition of qualification actually is that compound 3-part process.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, Graham, because actually those results depend on the fact that you've evaluated their prior experience and that they have experience in the seat of a crane for 50 or 100 hours. So, I didn't state that in the statistic, but that underlies that statistic. And you're absolutely right. Just the evaluation in VR is not the whole picture. You've got to have the rest of the picture with experience and practical use of a crane and the variety of cranes they've had, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't want to mislead the generalizability, but all I can say is it's a very promising result.
Yeah, you bet. And you pointed out something that might have been easily missed. And Graham, one thing we were sort of laughing about, I think, during the first research project was we didn't really know what was going to be a good result or not. You recall that? So we were, CCO had never had data collected on if Zack was going to take a test today on a crane and take the same exact test tomorrow. CCO's never systematically collected those two scores, right? So we didn't know how reliable, when you're trying to compare the virtual test to a real test, we actually didn't have a benchmark to say when you compare a real test to a real test, what that was, correct?
That's exactly right. That was one of the big ahas, and it's kind of, where you kind of slap yourself around the head because you haven't thought of it before. But the reality is, once we started to get some of the correlation numbers in, and they were less than 1, some folks might even be having this conversation right now, which is, well, 0.88, that, why isn't it 100? Why isn't it 1? Why isn't it 1.0? Well, but is it 1.0 if you take the same test on an actual crane twice? Are you going to perform exactly the same way the second time? Are you even going to pass the second time? And so we didn't know at that point then what correlation were we chasing? Were we chasing a 1.0? Because, that might not even be a valid goal. And really, I don't know that we've answered that question because, I guess you could do another study. Just because of the way the world turns and how fallible we are as humans and the equipment we make, I doubt you're going to have a 1.0. But Wallace, maybe you have an observation about that.
Well, you're absolutely right. As a matter of fact, we earlier studied word processing in Excel, both, and found out that people who took the test in the morning didn't even get the same score in the afternoon on the same test. So, and people are people. It's just the way it is. They notice something in the morning and miss it in the afternoon, or vice versa. And we were astounded with those results. I got them years ago, like 20 years ago, and I could hardly believe my eyes. People were not scoring identically in the morning on the same test with the same types of tasks that they had in the afternoon. So I think that'll always be a limitation. That's not going to go away. It's just that you want to come as close as you can to the accuracy of predicting what somebody's capabilities are. And I certainly recognize those limitations.
Well, in the first study, we did do, what we learned, I think, what you have here on the slide deck is, let me just explain. The first study, we had one candidate take 4 tests. They had to take the real crane test twice and then the virtual crane test twice. So that's where CCO was able to gather first data of its kind like that. And Wallace, I think we discerned that there's a 0.88 test retest score reliability. That's what that's pertaining to, right? With the real crane test 1 and real crane test 2. And this test is certainly subject to practice effects, which can account for some of that, I would imagine. What is it safe to say that how meaningful is that 0.88 number?
Quite meaningful. And as a matter of fact, it's interesting that the VR test on the same number is 0.69. In other words, there was less test-retest correlation for the VR than for the actual crane. So you've got both of those as limitations on your ability to predict from one to the other.
Yeah.
So, but we were able to find out that study, that preliminary study, had some issues that we were able to straighten out in the next study because, for example, it crossed a variety of different types of cranes, a variety of different locations, different amounts of practice, and it had a whole bunch of variability that we ironed out in the second dimension of the study.
Yeah, that's right. So the paper, which is available now, is really reflecting on the 2019 study, is what we're calling it, right? Of the 52 candidates, where we really, I call the first one kind of the research project, and we learned a lot and made a lot of improvements. Namely, for example, a blatant one was in the first research project, we had a lot of candidates that weren't actual CCO candidates. They weren't really there to pursue a certification. They were maybe some seasoned operators that just were helping us do some testing. We had a lot of non-operators even come to do the testing that failed miserably. And in the second study, it was 52 people in Houston, Texas, that were coming through an actual certification program to get their card to go finalize their, requirements to go to work. So yeah, much different population set.
Well, I would just say that, to some people, 52 might not seem a large number. I can tell you that a lot of the studies that you read about across all kinds of disciplines, whether it's health or the right car to buy or what food to eat, very often have much lower numbers than that. Because those numbers usually aren't disclosed, by the time you get them in a synthesized news report. But there are really two aspects to this that would that need to happen, and as Wallace said, were addressed in the second study. One is design, and the design was improved through Wallace's assistance significantly on the second one, and as he said, ironed out a number of the issues that really only came up on the first one. But some of those that did come up on the first one relate to the second challenge, which is logistics. I mean, and Zack, ITI did a fabulous job of identifying candidates who were willing and able to go through this process, because this is more than they would be expected to do if they were simply sitting for a CCO practical exam. And that's one of the reasons why it took several months to even gather this much data. So while it would be wonderful to have hundreds, if not thousands, of participants in a subsequent study, you're always going to have challenges on the logistics side.
Yeah, you bet.
I'd also like to, point to a final conclusion of the paper, and that is that it's recommended that only if people get a certain very high score on the simulator would they be granted a certification. If they didn't pass at a certain level, then they might be allowed to retest on an actual crane. And only if they failed dramatically on the virtual reality test would we recommend that they take additional practice before testing on either. So I think it's important to say that the test by itself would only be a very high specific level of recommendation for certification.
Yeah, it's a way to eliminate the any error, right? So that one data point you have with the study currently is decision consistency is 94%. So what I've learned from you, Wallace, one big thing we don't want to do is pass somebody in the virtual crane that would have failed the real crane. What do you call that? What kind of error? Type 1 error?
It's called, type 1 error.
Yeah. So a way to get rid of that is to, if we were to move forward with VR testing, is to raise if the current real crane cut score is 70%, for example, raising the VR crane cut score to 75%, for example, might statistically get rid of that possibility.
Exactly.
Yeah. Neat. Well, to wrap up, guys, I'd love to understand, Graham, what you feel. I know we're going to be presenting, I believe, some of this information at the commissioner meeting and different meetings, board of directors and commissioner meetings this year. I think it's exciting that the foundation got this paper out so that just the community of really concerned people for crane safety get to absorb this, and take this in over the next few months. But I know we have discerned that we certainly, and we're still collecting candidate tests in Houston. We're adding data to this set still as we speak. But what are some other next steps you all would recommend?
Well, I think it's really important to understand. First of all, we're very excited that, as you said, the study is published. It's been it's a multi-month project, if not really, if you think about the genesis, a multi-year project. Yep. And this is really a groundbreaking study, not just in the construction world, the crane world, but I think also, Wallace would agree, in the certification community. There's a lot of unknowns out here. We don't know to what extent the ANSI accreditation process, what lens they'll view this through. It hasn't been tried and tested yet through that at all. And I think it's really important to understand that VR certification is not right around the corner. So for those who are on the podcast wondering how they can sign up to take a test through VR, that's not currently being offered. And it's not actually a decision the foundation will be making anyway. That's a foundation for NCCCO. And I'm not even sure that question has ever really been directly raised. It couldn't really be raised until this study was published. So whatever else happens with respect to NCCCO or CCO certification, that really is in the NCCCO court, not in the foundation's court. It's not something that I'm able to opine on. And so I just wanted to add that, so cautionary note. As excited as we are, as groundbreaking as the study is, and as so preemptive in a way, or as encouraging as it will be for future studies to build on this platform, to build on these results, I don't think we should be under any illusion that VR certification is not currently on the radar.
Sure. Well put. Yep. Wallace, any other recommendations for next steps?
Well, clearly, we want to have a lengthier study with more candidates to validate the conclusions that we came to in this study. But I understand the hesitation of changing from actual testing to VR testing, but I don't think that we could have expected a more positive result from this study than the kind of type 1 error that we didn't get, and the positive results that let us look forward to VR testing in the future.
Yeah, there might be some advances in other tasks like construction safety or construction hazard awareness is something, Wallace, we're working on with you, that we could do a virtual certification exam for, practical exam. We're certainly looking at doing rigging inspection or basic rigging exams. The ability to, I think it's already been, even in the offshore world, simulators have been used for the recertification for quite a while in the Gulf as well as in the UK. And then, so it's certainly, it's been done before. I mean, it would be a big leap to, no one's expecting this to occur overnight, but I think the results are promising, and I'm excited to get more data so that we can make believers out of people. I mean, eventually the math won't lie. Like if we can objectively say this simulator can produce the same score for a candidate than a real life crane can, for example, in this case. And in Houston, Texas right now, a lattice boom crane exam costs $1,000, and to be able to lower that price to basically a CBT type exam for $50 is a pretty big savings for people that are a lot of people in Texas pay their own way to put themselves through to get certified, for example, just in the world of cranes. So if you really look across all sorts of tasks that are out there, and then you compound that, I think, with the skilled labor shortage and a lot of young people coming into this space that we're trying to get into this space, virtual reality is a very good tool that we want to shepherd or steward well. We don't want to misuse it or whatnot, but there's a lot of good benefits, and this is I'm excited for Wallace, for you to go on the speaking tour to get this out to a lot of different performance testing groups. So it's pretty groundbreaking stuff. So, gentlemen, thank you so much. We've got a webinar in 30 minutes, so I think we should take a break. And I really appreciate you coming together for this podcast. And I would encourage any listener, if they want to get a hold of Wallace or Graham, to find them on LinkedIn. They have, again, Graham, Brent, and Wallace Judd. And feel free to reach out if you have questions or want to discuss various opportunities. So thank you both again very much for joining today.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining this month's ITI Lites podcast. If you liked this episode, please make sure to leave us a like, share, and comment. Our guests today were Graham Brent and Wallace Judd. ITI Lites is a production of Industrial Training International. For additional insights on upcoming ITI Lites events, visit our website, www.lites.org.